Paige Bueckers returned to the spotlight wrapped in Nike's storytelling glow, carefully lit, emotionally loaded, and packed with symbolism. But while the visuals were polished, the moment never caught. The much-touted image of Bueckers with an empty suitcase was meant to suggest transformation and legacy, but the audience didn't see symbolism. They saw marketing, and they moved on. In the same stretch of time,
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
Caitlin Clark didn't need narrative scaffolding. Her performance built the story. She didn't arrive with metaphors. She arrived with 40-foot threes, broken records, and raw numbers. And fans noticed. In the marketing world, controversy can sometimes salvage a misstep. But Bueckers' rollout suffered something worse: invisibility. There was no discourse, no parody, no virality, just a void where engagement should have been. In contrast, Clark's rise followed a validation-first path. Every headline, every highlight was earned, not scripted. That divide isn't just about branding choices. It signals a cultural shift. Fans are no longer waiting for brands to tell them who matters. They already know. And if the proof isn't visible in the stats or the moment, no metaphor, no matter how artful, can fill that gap. Nike thought they were building a moment. What they ended up building was a metaphor for how completely detached sports branding has become from actual sports. The Suitcase scandal, despite its name, didn't involve wrongdoing. There was no drama, no social media blow-up, no messy headlines. What happened was quieter, more brutal. Nike launched a meticulously designed marketing campaign around Paige Bueckers, built on symbolism and style, and the world responded with silence. Not outrage, not interest, just nothing. And that silence? That's the scandal. The whole campaign was a case study in overproduced abstraction, cinematic shots, emotionally suggestive visuals, and a suitcase, a literal empty suitcase, meant to evoke transition, legacy, and journey. But in the absence of context, meaning, or performance, it just looked like a prop. A beautifully lit, completely hollow metaphor. This wasn't about a lack of talent. Paige Bueckers is still one of the most skilled players in the game. But skill doesn't automatically equal cultural relevance, especially when you haven't re-established yourself on the court after injury. Nike's mistake was betting on what Bueckers represented rather than what she had recently accomplished. They confused her past accolades with present momentum. They assumed potential was enough to carry a campaign. It wasn't. While Nike tried to shape a narrative from the top down, Caitlin Clark was writing her own story in real time, and the audience was watching. Clark didn't need a photo shoot or metaphorical luggage. She had box scores, highlights, packed arenas, breaking records without a single scripted moment. Her branding wasn't declared, it was proven. That's what made the contrast so sharp. One campaign needed interpretation. What am I supposed to feel about this suitcase? The other needed none. Clark's game translated. No metaphors necessary. The truth is, Bueckers' campaign never entered the bloodstream of the culture. No jersey surge. No online debate. No clips making the rounds. No audience response to measure. And that's worse than backlash, because at least backlash means people are paying attention. The silence wasn't neutral, it was damning. Nike tried to create a myth before the moment arrived. They pushed for emotional resonance before the performance existed to support it. They mistook nostalgia, aesthetics, and early career hype for current cultural traction. And in doing so, they overlooked what sports audiences have made crystal clear. Symbolism means nothing without a scoreboard to back it up. That's the core problem with the Suitcase campaign. It wasn't that the idea was bad. It's that the idea was floating in space, untethered to any real-world evidence. No titles, no current stats, no moment that would make people stop scrolling. And when you need people to interpret your campaign before they can feel it, you've already lost them. Meanwhile, Clark built her brand the hard way, on court. Her feedback loop was immediate. Performance led to attention, which drove engagement, which fueled loyalty. Fans didn't need to be told what she stood for. Her toughness, her record-breaking play, her grounded interviews, They spoke louder than any ad campaign. That's what makes this bigger than Bueckers or Clark. It's not a rivalry. It's a reckoning for how athletes are branded in the social era. A clear signal that fans no longer respond to manufactured mythologies. They want transparency. They want repetition. They want proof. They want to watch someone become great, not be told someone already is. Nike's vision-first approach with Bueckers was outdated from the start. They went all in on mood, lighting, and metaphor without any real performance data to support it. They built a campaign like a film trailer for a movie that hadn't been written yet. No one bought in because there was nothing to buy. By contrast, Clark's validation-first model was bulletproof. No campaign needed. The brand was the performance. And it came without stylized production, without slogans, without metaphorical baggage. It was measurable. It was earned. It was immediate. And the data backs it up. Clark's jersey sales. Her massive broadcast ratings. The lines of fans showing up early just to get a glimpse. Her reach is quantifiable, not projected. She didn't need a launch strategy because her consistency was the strategy. That's the shift we're watching in real time. From curated potential to documented excellence. From what could be to what already is. Clark didn't ask for a stage. She took it. And fans rewarded her with loyalty because they trusted what they were seeing. Nike misread that entirely. They thought audiences would rally behind a beautifully designed narrative. Instead, those same audiences rallied around the unfiltered, unscripted dominance of someone who didn't need a campaign to matter. Clark didn't need anyone to declare her iconic. She became undeniable. And while her numbers grew, Bueckers' campaign faded. Not in failure, in absence. No noise, no spike, no cultural signal that the audience cared. That's the brutal reality of marketing in this era. If your message doesn't land fast and real, it doesn't land at all. Mood is no longer enough. Meaning needs to be earned, not declared. The empty suitcase wasn't just a bad prop. It became a symbol for everything missing. Context, urgency, traction, relevance. It was a marketing artifact for a story that never arrived. This isn't about Paige Bueckers not being good enough. It's about the mistake of treating her like a finished narrative when she was still in the middle of her return. It's about a brand trying to control the story instead of letting it unfold. That's why Clark's approach hit harder. Her brand wasn't imposed, it emerged. And every game reinforced it. Every time she got knocked down and got back up. Every three she buried. Every record she broke. Every sold-out arena that didn't need a metaphor to explain what was happening. Fans don't want myth-making. They want evidence. So where does this go now? Nike's exit strategy for Bueckers was just as quiet as the campaign's reception. No pivot, no revision, no follow-up, just a quiet disappearance from the spotlight. No one talked about it because no one noticed. And that's what happens when a brand builds a moment with no tension, no proof, no urgency. It evaporates. Meanwhile, Clark's brand is only accelerating. And not because someone pushed it, but because people followed it. Her impact doesn't need mood lighting. Her presence doesn't need translation. She's not selling a story. She is one. And in this era of marketing, that's all that matters. So what do you think? Did Nike go all in on style and forget about substance? Was the Suitcase campaign a misread of what fans actually value? Is Clark's rise changing the rules for how athletes build power? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like if you're here for performance over polish. Share if you're tired of branding without receipts. And hit subscribe because this conversation about image, impact, and who really drives culture is just getting started. Nike didn't just miscalculate the market. They misunderstood the moment. The Paige Bueckers campaign wasn't a one-off creative risk. It was the result of an outdated strategy that's been running on fumes for years. Big brands deciding in a conference room who the culture should care about, then pushing that narrative through stylized content, emotionally manipulative music, and curated aesthetics. That formula might have worked in 2012. In 2024, the audience has moved on. And the Suitcase scandal, again, not a literal scandal, but a metaphor for this disconnect, is the proof. The symbolism was heavy-handed. The execution was sleek. But the context? Missing. When the campaign dropped, there was no surge of excitement, no curiosity, no emotional payoff. Because the core question never got answered. What had Bueckers done recently in the game to make this feel earned? The answer, unfortunately, was not much yet. Not because she lacked talent, but because she hadn't returned to dominance after her injury. Nike jumped the gun. They tried to crown a comeback before the comeback had materialized. They assumed that style could stand in for substance. And fans across the board rejected that assumption, not by booing, but by not responding at all. And that's the most damning outcome of all. In sports culture, controversy at least keeps you in the mix. A bad take, a wild ad, a tone-deaf moment, those still generate debate, still create data points, still offer visibility. But this campaign didn't even get that. No memes, no think pieces, no engagement, just silence. Clark, meanwhile, gave people exactly what they wanted: performance. Night after night, she delivered. And she did it without theatrics, without metaphor, without branding teams telling us how special she was. Her brand didn't emerge from design. It emerged from repetition, from durability, from being there when it mattered and showing up when it counted. And you could feel the difference. Nike's Paige Bueckers rollout felt like an attempt to revive a myth with no pulse. Clark's momentum was a living, breathing, audience-powered machine. The difference wasn't just what happened on the court. It was how both narratives were built. One was pushed, the other pulled people in. That shift from manufactured icon to observable proof is the paradigm Nike missed. And let's not pretend this is just about these two players. This is about how modern fandom functions. Today's audiences have been so relentlessly marketed to, so oversold, so bombarded with branding, that they've developed a near-instant reflex for detecting inauthenticity. They don't want the trailer. They want the raw footage. And when brands fail to deliver that, they don't get a second chance. Bueckers' campaign failed not because she isn't good, but because the narrative leaned too hard on a version of her that hadn't shown up yet. And that version couldn't compete with Clark's current version, who was putting up numbers, selling out arenas, and winning in real time. That's why Clark didn't just surpass the Bueckers campaign, she exposed it, without even trying. Her rise didn't just overshadow Nike's rollout. It reframed it. It turned the campaign into a cautionary tale of what happens when you try to write a story that hasn't unfolded yet, and when you assume the audience will follow your symbolism instead of the scoreboard. And when we talk about the suitcase, we're talking about more than just a prop. It was supposed to signal legacy, movement, identity. But to fans, it looked like a placeholder for a story they hadn't seen play out. An empty suitcase with no context is just that. Empty. Without the performance to validate the visual, the metaphor collapsed on itself. Nike essentially asked people to feel nostalgia for a return that hadn't happened, to cheer for a journey with no recent milestones, to buy into a narrative that hadn't been earned in the current moment. That's the danger of prioritizing brand design over competitive reality. And yet, it keeps happening. Because a lot of these major sports brands still believe in the vision-first approach. Pick a marketable athlete, build a myth around them, and let the creative teams run wild. But that system depends on one crucial assumption: that fans will suspend disbelief long enough for the narrative to catch up to the reality. Not anymore. Fans are too dialed in. They watch the games. They know the stats. They follow the stories. You can't just declare someone culturally important anymore. That status has to be earned, and earned again, post-injury, post-hype cycle burnout. And in Bueckers' case, the work hadn't caught up to the message. That doesn't mean it won't. She's still young, still gifted, still capable of leading the next chapter. But if and when that happens, the audience will be ready because of her performance, not because a brand told them to be. That's what Clark figured out by simply being herself. No overproduction, no self-proclamation, just presence. Her interviews were about process. Her demeanor was grounded. Her message was unscripted. And the result? Fans didn't just root for her. They trusted her. That trust is everything now. And you don't build it with mood boards. You build it with consistency. So what's the larger takeaway? The era of marketing-led storytelling is fading. The future belongs to performance-led belief building. And brands that don't adjust to that shift, brands that cling to symbolism over substance, are going to keep launching campaigns that don't just flop, they disappear. Which is exactly what happened here. Paige Bueckers didn't fall off. She was just miscast in a narrative that arrived before she did. And by the time the campaign dropped, fans were already locked in elsewhere, watching a different player make history, one game at a time. Nike, with all its creative firepower, misread the room. They went all in on tone and metaphor, while the culture was being moved by execution. That disconnect didn't just miss the moment, it missed the model. It showed that the old blueprint, marketable face, dramatic visuals, high-stakes symbolism, is broken without competitive validation to anchor it. The suitcase didn't need to be empty. The campaign didn't need to fail. But without something real behind it, without recent wins, a dominant stretch, or even a viral moment, the whole thing folded under its own aesthetic weight. There's something almost poetic about how the Paige Bueckers campaign fell apart. Not with a bang, not with outrage, but with nothing. In a culture where even mediocrity can go viral, where one misstep can dominate the news cycle for days, Nike's investment into Bueckers vanished into the void. And that vanishing act, the eerie silence, the lack of reaction, is exactly what makes it so significant. Because if you spend millions to position someone as the face of a movement and the culture collectively shrugs, that's not just a bad campaign. That's a structural failure. It means the message didn't just miss, it never connected in the first place. What happened here wasn't about Bueckers' character or potential. This was about timing. This was about context. And more than anything, this was about Nike trying to handcraft belief instead of waiting for the audience to arrive at it themselves. And that's the part they misunderstood. You can't manufacture cultural relevance anymore. You can't fast-track legacy. And you definitely can't sell symbolism before the story it's meant to symbolize has actually happened. That's what the suitcase image tried to do. Meant to evoke a journey, a return, a passage. But what did it actually convey to the average viewer? What did it mean in the absence of any recent highlight reels, championship runs, or comeback moments? Nothing. The metaphor was empty because the data wasn't there. The campaign asked the audience to imagine greatness instead of showing them evidence of it. That kind of ask might have flown 10 years ago, before the internet changed how people interact with sports. Now, fans track greatness. They watch it unfold. They document it as it happens. If the receipts aren't there, they're not buying it. Contrast that with Caitlin Clark. Every game she played, every shot she made, every interview she gave, it was all part of an ever-expanding archive of impact. Her narrative wasn't told in marketing decks. It was broadcast live. When she hit another logo 3 or broke another attendance record, that was the brand. That was the storytelling. And the audience didn't need to be convinced. They were already invested. That's what Nike missed. They tried to reverse engineer cultural resonance. But what Clark showed is that performance builds story, not the other way around. And the audience isn't waiting around for a brand to tell them who to care about. They already know. They already see it. They're already feeling it. That's why Bueckers' campaign faded the way it did. It didn't give people anything to feel. It assumed they were still holding on to 2021 Bueckers, the Naismith winner, the freshman phenom. But too much time had passed. Too many games were missed. Too many other stars had risen in the meantime. And Nike never accounted for that shift. They tried to hit resume on a narrative the audience had already paused. And instead of creating a compelling reason to press play again, they leaned on aesthetics, on metaphor, on emotional shorthand that no longer works unless it's backed by proof. The result? Silence. Not apathy toward Bueckers the athlete, but indifference toward the idea of Bueckers that Nike was trying to sell. Because fans aren't anti-hype. They're just over unearned hype. They're done with the here comes the moment campaign when the moment hasn't arrived yet. Especially when there's already someone like Clark who is the moment. Let's talk about Clark's brand for a second. Her media presence isn't loud. Her interviews aren't dramatic. She doesn't posture. She doesn't position herself as a savior of the game. She just plays. And that humility, that directness, It cuts through the noise. It's not a gimmick, it's a signal, a sign that what you're watching is real. And in a sports ecosystem oversaturated with performative empowerment messaging, Clark's matter-of-fact delivery feels refreshing. Because she doesn't need to tell us she's resilient. We've seen it. She doesn't need to tell us she's ready. We already know. The evidence is right there in every possession, every stat, every fan reaction. Bueckers, by contrast, was handed a campaign that acted like we were all already on the same page. Like we were mid-journey when, really, the journey hadn't resumed. And when the audience didn't respond, it exposed how deeply the strategy misread the moment. Again, this wasn't about whether Paige Bueckers deserves a brand. Of course she does. She's an elite-level talent, a fan favorite, and someone who will matter in the future of the sport. But Nike's mistake was treating her absence from competitive relevance as a narrative moment in itself. It wasn't. It was a gap. And they tried to fill that gap with a suitcase, with symbols, with vibes, and fans didn't bite. Because there's a difference between rooting for a comeback and being sold one that hasn't started. There's a difference between anticipation and assumption. Nike didn't give the audience a reason to believe. They just acted like the belief was already there. Meanwhile, Clark kept delivering, over and over, without flash, without theatrics, and without needing a single metaphor. That's what performance-led belief building looks like. It's not about perfection. It's about consistency. It's about giving people something they can follow, not something they have to interpret. Nike launched a one-time cinematic campaign that hoped to declare a cultural moment. Clark created one through repetition, through presence. Every play added to the story. Every stat deepened it. Her brand iterated, while Bueckers was prematurely finalized and frozen in aesthetic amber. That's the part that matters. Because the future of sports marketing isn't about pre-built legends. It's about responsive storytelling, about letting the brand unfold naturally based on what's happening, not what you hope will happen. It's about meeting the audience where they are, not asking them to leap into your visual metaphor and figure out how it makes sense. So where does it go from here? Nike has a choice. They can keep building narratives in isolation and hope the culture catches up, or they can start building narratives with the culture, based on what's real, what's earned, what's actually moving people. Bueckers still has time to define her story. But the next chapter has to come from her, not from a mood-lit promo. The court has to lead now. And if she dominates again, if she stays healthy, puts up numbers, brings people out, makes people care, then the campaign writes itself. Because when the story is true, it doesn't need to be sold. It spreads. So what's your take? Was Nike out of touch with the Bueckers campaign? Did the suitcase represent anything real, or was it just noise? And is Caitlin Clark rewriting the entire rulebook for how athletes earn cultural power in this era? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like if you're watching this shift unfold in real time. Share if you're over brand-first storytelling. And subscribe, because the gap between marketing and reality is shrinking fast, and the next athlete to break through won't need a metaphor to do it.